Welcome viewer to the course of web designing. In this video you will learn that what is Flexbox, setting up a Flexbox, properties of Flex container, that is Flux Direction, FlexWrap, FlexFlow, justifiedContent and alignItem properties. You will also learn about FlexItem properties, that is align cell property, flex property and order property. So let's start. What is Flexbox? What is CSS Flexible Box? Flexible box, commonly referred to as Flexbox, is a layout module introduced in CSS 3 for creating the flexible user interface design with multiple rows and columns and without using the percentage or fact-length values. Designed to provide a better way to lay out, align, and distribute space among items in a container. The ability to make all neighboring items of the same height. The ability to change order in which item display independent of the source. Setting up a Flexbox container. To turn on Flexbox mode for an element, set its display property to flex or inline flex. Look at these codes. Here we have a div element with ID container. To convert this div element into a Flexbox container, define a CSS rule and set its display property to flex, like this one. Now this div element turned into flex container. Suppose there are some child div elements of this container, such as all these child div elements belong to a class box, and all of the direct child elements automatically become flex items in that container. The flex items are laid out and aligned along the flex line, controlling the flow within the flex container. The Flux Direction property. This property is used to establish the main axis, that is, to define the direction of the flex items to be placed in the flex container. Flexbox is a single direction layout concept, that is, to place the item in horizontal direction or in vertical direction. The possible value of Flux Direction properties are row, column, row reverse, and column reverse, where the default property of the Flux Direction property is row. If we set the value of direction property to row, then the item will appear like this one, from left to right, while if you set the value of the Flux Direction property to row reverse, then they will appear like this. While if you set the property a Flux Direction property to column and column reverse, then the flex item will appear like this when the video is column, while like this when the video is column reverse. FlexWrap property. By default, flex item try to fit on one line. However, you can change their behavior to allow the items to wrap as needed using the FlexWrap property. The value of the FlexWrap property are no wrap, wrap, and wrap reverse. The default value of this wrap property is no wrap, that is, all flex item will be on one line, while this property applies to flex container. Look at these codes. Here I want to show you that how to convert an element into a flex container and how to set its flex direction and flex wrap properties. So here in the body section we have a div element and its ID is container. So I want to convert this div element into a flex container. For this purpose we have defined the CSS rules to set its display property to flex. This property, setting display property to flex, will convert the div element into a flex container. And then we have defined the flex direction and flex wrap properties, while we have also defined that the height of the flex is 250 pixels, and to draw a solid border of 2 pixel thickness of green color around the container. Now look at the output of these codes. So come to the browser and type localhost /flexbox.html. So this is the output of these codes. Now I want to create some child element within this div element. I have already created, but just to paste those codes here. Now we have 10 child element within this div element. Save the file and refresh the browser once again. Now this is the output of the code. Now we want to apply some formatting on the child element as well, that is to set its width, height and border properties. So I have created a div child selector to set the width, height and border properties of the child element. So save the file and refresh the browser. So all the item has been displayed in one line because we have the flex direction property set to row and flex wrap property is no wrap. You can change these properties, such as for the flex direction we have row, column, row reverse and column reverse value, while similarly you can set the flex wrap property to wrap, no wrap and wrap reverse. Suppose you want to set this property to wrap, but before this first set this row to column. To look at this one, so column Save the file, refresh the browser. So the output will be like this. Now you can apply the row reverse and column reverse property as well. So change it to row again. Save it and refresh the browser. And now I want to change the no wrap to wrap. So for the FlexWrap property we have the value wrap. Now refresh the browser once again. So the output will be like this. If you want, you can set the FlexWrap property to wrap reverse. So type wrap reverse, save the file and have a look at the output. So refresh the browser. So the output will be like this, starting from the bottom line and then move in the upper direction to place the item. So in this way you set the Flex container and then define its Flux Direction and FlexWrap property. The FlexFlow property. The Flex property is a shorthand notation to specify the Flux Direction and FlexWrap properties, to define the Flux container main and cross axis. When you are defining a FlexFlow property, so first specify the Flux Direction property and then the FlexWrap property. While the default value for the FlexFlow property are row and no wrap, and this property apply to a Flex container. Justified content. The justified content property align the Flexbox item across the main axis when the item do not use all available space on the main axis. Following are the default and other values of the justified content property, and the justified content apply to a Flex container. If we set the flow direction property to row, then the behavior of the justified content with different value will be something like this. Suppose after setting the flow direction property to row, for the justified content we have the value flex start, then the output will be like this. While if we set the justified content to flex end, then the output will be like this one, to set the content towards the end of the row. While if the justified content's value is center, the items are positioned at the center of the container. If the value is space between, items are positioned with space between the items. When the value is space around, items are positioned with space before, between, and after the items. The alignItem property. The alignItem property defines the default behavior, that how flex items are laid out along the cross axis on the current line. As we studied, that justify content property align the item along the main axis. On the other hand, alignItem property align the item across the cross axis, and the different values used with alignItem properties are flex, start, end, center, baseline, and stretch, where stretch is the default property, and this property is also applied to flex container. Look at this segment of code. Here we want to demonstrate the behavior of the alignItem contents. First of all, we want to set this div element as a div container, and we also want to define some item between this div container like this. Thus, there are 5 child elements within this div container. Now, to specify the CSS rule to convert this div item into flex container, so set its display property to flex, and the Flux Direction property is row, while say the height of the container is 200 pixels, and the value of the alignItem property is flex start. So when the value is flex start, so the output of these codes will be something like this one. That is, the item are placed at the start of the cross axis, while if we change this flex start value to flex end, then the output will be like this, to place item at the bottom of the cross axis, while setting this value to center, the output will be like this one. And similarly, if we set this value to stretch, the output will be like this one. The flex align cell property. The align cell property of flex item override the flex container align items property for a specific item. It has the same possible value as the alignItem property, that is flex start, flex end, center, baseline, and stretch. And stretch is the default value for this property, and this property applies to flex items. Look at the following CSS rule and figure. The fourth box is set to align at the end of the cross axis, while the other have the default stretch behavior, because here in the CSS rule the align cell property is set to flex end for the fourth box to override the alignItem property, while the remaining item have the default behavior. The flex property. The flex property is used to control the flex, which specify how much an item can grow and shrink, and identify its starting size. The flex is a shorthand property for flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis property. The specification The specifications strongly recommend that author use the flex shorthand instead of individual property in order to avoid conflicting default values. The order property. The order property specifies the order of the flexible item relative to the rest of the flexible item inside the same container. It takes an integer value where the default value for an item is 0. For example, look at this box. Here the value for box number 1, 2, 4 and 5 is 0, while for the box number 3 the order value is 1, as we have specified in the CSS rule order equal to 1. So those items which have the order value as 0 will be displayed first, and after that to display the item whose order value is 1. If suppose there is an item whose order value is 2, so it will occur after 3. So thanks for watching this video.